Welcome to My Business Matters, the Michigan Chamber podcast.
Welcome to My Business Matters, the podcast of the Michigan Chamber of Commerce. This is where we have meaningful conversations on the issues shaping our state's future. Today's conversation will take a closer look at the Michigan-Ontario border and one of the most integrated economic relationships in the world. Not just trading goods, but building products together across shared supply chains. That connection supports a significant share of Michigan's economy and plays a key role in North American competitiveness. At the same time, evolving tariff and trade policy, the upcoming USMCA agreement review are creating new questions for employers trying to plan, invest, and grow. Here today to help us unpack all of this, we have three great guests. We have Sandy Baruah. He's the president and CEO of the Detroit Regional Chamber of Commerce, which also runs MichAuto. They're a voice for automotive manufacturing and next-generation mobility. We have Chuck Lippstreau. He's the president of Michigan Agri-Business Association, and Michael Imo is the Michigan Chamber of Commerce's senior director of legislative and external affairs. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Sandy, I'd like to start with you if we could, just kind of set a foundation for listeners. We often talk about how the Michigan-Ontario relationship, we're deeply integrated. What does that mean for how businesses and industries operate day to day?
Really manufacturing, Jim, as you know so well, the manufacturing sector across the United States and Canada started integrating 120 years ago, and that was by design. That wasn't through any government policy. That was through individual and businesses making the decisions about where they wanted to locate, who they wanted to employ, and where the best value was for the raw materials that they needed to build their automobiles or whatever manufactured device that they were building. And that has served Michiganders incredibly well for well over a century. And if you expand that to Mexico through either, if you want to call it NAFTA or the updated USMCA agreement, these three countries have not only survived together, but they have thrived together. Our economic output in these three countries has tripled just since the time that NAFTA was created during the George H.W. Bush administration, which was quite some time ago now.
It seems certain that, if we look at us, especially Michigan, Ontario, and then you add in Mexico, Michigan, Ontario especially, it's a region, and today's global marketplace, being so interconnected, just has so many benefits, and it seems like if we are a little more efficient and streamlined in how we're operating, we're just going to benefit everybody, and we need to look at growth of the region because it's this region that's competing against the world, not just Michigan or not just Ontario.
Yeah, and let's go back in history when NAFTA was created. One of the reasons why NAFTA was created back in the late 1980s was then the perceived threat of Japan at the time. Now, us are old enough to remember those days when we thought take over the world. But now the threat really is China. And we are only going to succeed against China in the same way that the EU has banded together multiple countries, creating a unified network, a unified market. And that's exactly what NAFTA/USMCA has been designed to do. So we need to make sure that we're building off of USMCA, not trying to go in the opposite direction.
Chuck, from your point, sitting here a leading voice within the agricultural community, what are you seeing as some of the biggest cross-border commodities or touch points in agriculture, either historically or even right now?
Well, look, first from a high level, agriculture has tracked the successes that Sandy just outlined. Michigan agriculture is a major exporter. It's the number 2 economic driver in our state. Exports around $3 billion currently of products around the world every year. And when you look at when those exports, where those break down, 42% of our state's ag exports by value go to Canada, most of them to Ontario. Another 18 to 20% head to Mexico. And that has been a real success story for our state. Those numbers have risen in recent years in terms of the value of ag exports. And in terms of the Michigan-Ontario relationship, it could not be more intertwined. It's somewhat similar to auto supply chains or other things that we see where products can actually move back and forth across that border multiple times. Think about the animal ag sector, where you might have soybeans grown in Michigan, processed in Michigan, exported to Ontario to feed livestock, and then animal products or the live animals are coming back. Vice versa, we might bring soy meal in from Ontario, feed it to livestock that are then sent back across the border. Those are very simple examples of, there's a number of more complex ones, but when you look at the Michigan ag landscape, it's no surprise we actually have businesses in our membership, in fact in the Michigan Chamber membership, that operate facilities here in Michigan and also across Ontario because of that close intertwined relationship.
Yeah, I guess I never really thought about how many times products go back and forth with ag. It's more intuitive for me in the auto sector with an engine going back and forth or things of that nature. I know we have a lot of people going back and forth for jobs on both sides of the border.
But it's really a region, right?
Yeah.
It underscores that we are a regional economy that has grown together. And frankly, we have a lot of opportunity in the future, at least for agriculture. I know our members, our industry is very excited about the future opportunity with the opening of the Gordie Howe International Bridge, the opportunities to grow alongside companies across the border in Ontario as well.
Yeah. Sandy, how do you view the opening of the bridge? What type of impact are you hoping to see from that?
So first of all, many organizations, Jim, including the organization that you lead, the Michigan Chamber, Business Leaders, our organization and others, worked over the course of 20 years. Jim, before you and I were in the jobs that we had, to ensure that the Gordie Howe International Crossing was actually built. And it was a tough slog. We had a lot of opposition in Washington, in Michigan, to get it done. But at the end of the day, let's be super clear about what the Gordie Howe International Crossing is. First of all, it is fully paid for by Canadian taxpayer dollars. Full stop. Number two, even though it is fully paid for by Canada, it is co-owned by the government of Canada and the state of Michigan. They basically built it and gave half of it to us. And thirdly, every piece of infrastructure on the U.S. side, including the customs plazas, the roadway access, the steel, was all built by American workers and American materials. So the rationale for not opening it doesn't exist. It just doesn't. So I am very confident that this bridge will open this year.
No, that's great news, and we appreciate your leadership on that issue. We work closely with you on that and really follow you on that because you are so close to it in your region down there and the importance of it. And I agree with you. I think, I'm hopeful that's a lot of just political blustering more than anything else because that can really be a game changer for a lot of people and a lot of industries strengthening us. Michael Imo, there's a lot of discussion right now around tariffs and trade policy. If we kind of put politics aside, what are you hearing from chamber members, their businesses across the state as they're trying to navigate this uncertain time?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, obviously the Michigan Chamber benefits from having thousands of members in every corner of the state. And so we were able to survey them, asking them, how they felt about tariff policy, how they're potentially impacted. I think that impacted side of things was really informative to say, hey, look, you might have your opinion about the administration or this approach, but at the end of the day, how are you being impacted? And we had a lot of company members. Again, they might even support an approach to using tariffs as trade policy, but admitting very clearly that they would be impacted. And so I think for all of our members, the key to trade policy or frankly any policy is business certainty, right? That they know what the rules of the game are going to be, so that they can compete in a global marketplace. And so it really is important that we continue to work across the border, have these discussions, and find resolution to the USMCA as it's under review coming up in July. And what our approach is to tariffs and trade with our Canadian partners. I mean, we talked previously about how highly integrated the supply chains are between the two countries and more specifically between Michigan and Ontario. Just to put some numbers behind that, more than a quarter of Ontario's exports to the U.S. contain American import content, right? So, that really tells you that this isn't just a one-way stop for any one product. These are going back and forth. So even Ontario selling products to the U.S. benefits the U.S. because there is U.S. content in a number of those products. And in fact, we talk about, the trade deficit, right, is another kind of important data point that we need to look at when we're, reviewing our economic relationship. Well, the U.S. exports more goods to Canada than China, Japan, and the United Kingdom combined. Mm-hmm. I mean, so if we're talking about competing with China, if we're talking about reducing the trade deficit, all of this points to having only a deeper economic relationship with our Canadian partners.
Mike, can you, just for listeners' benefit, briefly, what's the review process, or how does that take place? How long does it last? Yeah,
so the relationship right now, we've seen a lot of rhetoric, right? But at the end of the day, this is really discussions between, the trade representatives of both countries. Those conversations are happening right now, and then as we get to this July timeframe, there's kind of a decision that needs to be unanimous across Mexico, Canadian, and U.S. leaders that we want to stay in the USMCA. We want to, keep this relationship going forward. And so it really is a critical time right now for the Michigan Chamber and our business partners like Chuck and Sandy to, really make sure that we're educating lawmakers about the importance of this relationship.
Sandy, what's your outlook on this review?
Oh, no, thanks. I was going to be rude and interrupt anyway. So thanks.
Jump in.
Look, I think what Michael said is exactly right. Let me just expand on that just for a second. So here are some of the fallacies about tariffs. So we are so proud, as we all are, that we still have what we now affectionately call the Detroit 3 automakers, largely based here in our home state of Michigan. Of those three, they build a majority of their vehicles in the United States. Of the three, Ford Motor Company actually builds more of their cars here than anybody else. No one builds more vehicles in the United States than Ford Motor Company. Now, this is not an advertisement for Ford Motor Company because I set that up. During the tariff regime that was initially announced about a year ago, Ford Motor Company ended up paying far more in tariff costs than their other competitors, even though they built more of their final vehicle production in the United States and, frankly, in Michigan than any other company. Mm-hmm. And so when you have a tariff regime that ends up in those kinds of, I would say, unintended consequences, that's a problem. That is something we absolutely need to think about. And when you think about the costs of our signature industry, automotive, and I agree with Chuck, agriculture is number two. These are two industries that are absolutely vital to our industry, to our economy. But when you look at our automotive industry alone, it has been $35 billion paid in tariff costs that didn't go to employees, didn't go to shareholders, didn't go to the bottom line, didn't go to R&D. It went into the ether. And someone needs to explain to me how that helps Michigan businesses and Michigan workers.
Yeah, just taking money right off the top. I think, all of us here, I'll speak for myself, I think we're more about the free traders. You want fair free trade, and we want to keep the cost down. We want everybody who can use the free enterprise system and entrepreneurism to thrive and grow and create products and really tap into every part of the global marketplace, free of the barrier. Chuck, how do you view agriculture in the world of tariffs? I think a lot of times we default to maybe the autos or hard good manufacturing. How does it impact your world and your members?
Yeah, look, I think it tracks with other segments, tariffs have created some uncertainty and some turbulence across a number of areas in agriculture. You know, maybe one of the good news pieces of the current situation that's benefited agriculture, we hope continues to benefit the industry, is the USMCA exemption that's remained, that allows crop input products and other ag exports to move even during the current uncertain environment. One of the things that agriculture writ large is focused on right now amid the renewal process, or looking ahead to the renewal, is banding together across industries within agriculture on a shared goal. And that shared goal is to encourage the administration to maintain a trilateral agreement, leaving the administration some room, like every administration has had over the course of decades, to negotiate U.S. trade policy. We understand that President Trump has some issues he's concerned about. He's been very public about this, including agricultural issues like dairy. That is a completely reasonable thing for us to see.
Can you kind of explain just the dairy issue a little bit?
So the dairy issue, there's a long-standing, issue that has got to continue to be discussed and ultimately addressed regarding U.S. and Canadian dairy policy, and the opportunity for U.S. dairy products and Michigan-grown dairy products or Michigan-created dairy products to be exported into Canada. There's some ongoing concern that Canadian dairy policy is unfair to U.S. Dairy industry participants and U.S. dairy farmers. But let's zoom out from that a little bit and understand, everybody, I think many listening to this podcast, you're chamber members, you operate a business, you can run a business and you can have disagreements with close business partners, even friends and family. And what do? You work through those things. Yeah. And they could be tough negotiations, that's all right, but you come out stronger on the other side.
Yes.
And you don't let it tank the broader economic benefit. So from a national industry perspective, there's actually a coalition that we're very supportive of called Agriculture for USMCA. That is all segments of agriculture, including those segments with some things to get worked out between the U.S. and Canada. Emphasizing for the administration, look, there is room to work with our trading partners to negotiate, maybe to seek some improvements. But at the end of the day, we need to walk out of this with a trilateral agreement that maintains market access into Canada and into Mexico, keeps products flowing between the U.S., between Michigan and Ontario, and avoids a series of messy bilateral agreements that would create real trouble. We want to talk about the original question, what's the impact of tariffs for agriculture? They create more complexity and uncertainty. And if you end up with a series of bilateral agreements at the end of all this, that becomes certainly more complex and difficult for the agricultural industry.
And complexity and uncertainty is never good for any business, whether you're ag or supplier. And I think we've established too that banding together with trilateral agreements is just going to make us stronger in the U.S.
Correct.
Sandy, is there a good use of tariffs at some point? Is there a value to them on certain situations?
Yeah, so let's be super clear. The answer to that question, Jim, is yes. In some ways, the president is not directionally wrong. I'll give you an example. Chuck just mentioned dairy, right? Canada has a long-term tariffs on dairy products, right? Because it is of particular importance to the Canadian economy. It's kind of a cultural issue in certain parts of Canada, and they have protected dairy for the last, Chuck, correct me if I'm wrong, but going back over 50 years now.
A long time.
Softwood lumber is another one. We have done the same thing with trucks. There's something called chicken tax that was enacted the early days of the Reagan administration that puts a pretty hefty tariff on pickup trucks, which has really curtailed international competition coming into the United States to compete with our pickup truck business, our commercial use and private use pickup truck business. And let's face it, that has been hugely successful. You see a lot of Silverados, Rams, and F-150s on the road. You don't see many Japanese or other countries pickup on the road. Another use for tariffs is when there is clear evidence of unfair trading practices by another country. And electric vehicles and, frankly, the Chinese automotive industry is a prime example of unfair trade practices. The Chinese automotive industry, as impressive as it is, and anyone who wants to make fun or belittle the Chinese auto industry needs to take a look to see what they're doing now. But they are being heavily, heavily subsidized by the Chinese taxpayers, and they are heavily, heavily overproducing, and they are essentially dumping, and that is a technical term, dumping Chinese vehicles onto the rest of the world. And the United States is the last place on earth that it's very hard to buy a Chinese car. You can do it through like a Volvo or a couple of our American brands that import Chinese cars under their brand. But we're the last ones left that have really kind of prohibited this practice, and there's good reason for that.
Yeah, and I think your examples are great, and they're a perfect illustration of what we all need to keep in mind. We want fair, free, open trade, but you have to have tools in the toolbox when somebody's dumping product and really distorting the market for your country. Recently, all three of you were in a room. We had a nice conversation, a business roundtable with some leading officials from Ontario, economic officials. What was the most consistent message or biggest takeaway you had from that conversation? And Chuck, I'll start with you.
I mean, look, it was an overall reminder of so many of the topics we've touched on here in the last 20 minutes or so. Mm-hmm. The close intertwined regional relationship, the need for industries to have certainty and predictability with regard to their trade policy, and frankly, the opportunities ahead of us if we get this right going forward. The excitement around, Sandy, you talked about the opening of the Gordie Howe Bridge. We had an opportunity, even though it was our partners in Canada, to talk about the importance of Mexico for Michigan. I think about within our membership up in the thumb of Michigan, it's the leading region for the production of black beans in America, and we send many of those beans straight to Mexico City to be sold into the Mexico market. It was an opportunity to reflect on the shared opportunity, and that's what really stood out to me. And I appreciated our Canadian partners, and continue to appreciate the partnership of the our Canadian trade partners and government officials in terms of trying to find a pathway to continued free and open trade.
Mike?
Yeah, no, I think it showed, to Chuck's point, this continued very strong interest from both the Ontario Trade Office, but the Ontario delegation and leadership themselves to really, again, focus on only deepening the ties they have with Michigan. Certainly there's some cautious optimism, right, as we're moving into this July time frame. But I think, generally speaking, folks do understand that this relationship and this economic partnership that we have is far too important to let political rhetoric kind of get in the way and hold it back. And so I think we're all of the minds that cooler heads are going to prevail. We're going to work towards an agreement here. But I think, to Chuck's point, it's an important opportunity to reflect on why it does matter and what are some of those messages we should be sending to our leaders in Washington.
Sandy?
Yeah, I would agree. So first of all, thank you to the Michigan Chamber and your team for hosting such an important discussion. I was so delighted to be with so many friends and colleagues and be part of that conversation. What I would just add to what Chuck and Michael have said is that we're always stronger together than we are alone. I mean, that is. I don't care if you're an individual, a family, a community, or a country. Right? I mean, the best times in our history has been when we have done things together. And I don't care if it's Canada, Mexico, the United Kingdom, or name the other country. We are just so much better when we do things together.
Well, we're coming to the end of time. I want to go around and just briefly, Mike, Alima, we'll start with you. Just one thought. If policymakers are listening to this conversation that you're having today and they're listening to this podcast, what's one thing that you want policymakers to take away or to be focused on?
My message is pretty simple. I think, lean in, right? I think don't shy away from these conversations. The political rhetoric is going to kind of be what it is. But at the end of the day, this is important, and everybody needs to, further their understanding of why that matters so that we can keep these conversations going.
Chuck?
There's space on both sides of the aisle for for a common sense regional economic discussion that starts with maintaining a trilateral USMCA and maintaining the partnership between Michigan and Canada. It's not a partisan issue. It's one that comes back to economic success, both for our biggest cities and for our small towns and agricultural sector.
Sandy?
For especially our national political figures to really understand the importance of what President Trump did when he was in office the first time around with what he did with UMCA. There's roughly 9 chapters to the USMCA. 6 or 7 of them are completely non-controversial. Make sure that we move to codify those 6 to 7 chapters of USMCA, keep that intact. If we have issues for the 2 or 3 remaining ones, fine, let's go deal with that, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Well, if I was president for a day, I'd make you 3 in charge of trade policy because I think you're all hitting the nail.
That'd be an exciting day, wouldn't it?
And I think
Sure would.
I think as we've explored today, the Michigan-Ontario relationship, especially, is an integral part of our state's economic foundation, but it's going to depend on clarity and predictability. As trade policy evolves, making Michigan's voice part of that conversation is going to be critical, and it's not just for the near future, but for our state's long-term economic competitiveness. Very special thanks to Sandy Baruah, the President and CEO of the Detroit Regional Chamber, Chuck Lippstreau, the President of Michigan Agri-Business Association, Michael Imo, Senior Director of Legislative and External Affairs at the Michigan Chamber, and thanks to all of you for listening.